effective unions, perhaps in pursuing some of these kind of moral aspects of their activity, we can see the impact in other aspects of reward systems beyond simply level and their effects on the pay structure. So if we look at the range of rewards that are associated with unions, we get a glimpse of the kind of things that they're concerned about as well. And again, this draws on particularly the work of Ed Heery in looking at the impact of unions in this way. Because sometimes we assume that the unions have got a fairly narrow focus, that they're just interested in the cash, and I think this goes back to this idea about gompers and more. And so this kind of monomania with cash tends to narrow their interest on other rewards. And I think sometimes this is an approach which is designed, either deliberately or not, to tar unions with the brush of being kind of rather old-fashioned. And so as reward approaches have extended over recent years, and so the range of reward mechanisms, reward tools has grown through the new pay, strategic reward, all of the work of people like Edward Lawler and others to increase the range of things that are incorporated by reward. We can cast unions as being kind of retrogressive, that they're a bit old-fashioned, bit of a throwback. All they're interested in is cash pay and pay level, and all these other things that we know are important in terms of motivation and performance and productivity. They're not part of the union agenda. So that assumption has been there for a while. In actual fact, we tend to see kind of the opposite. If we look at the range of rewards that are typically available to workers in unionised environments, unionised workers are more likely to receive than non-union workers important rewards like sick pay, pensions. We've seen the attack on pension schemes, the removal of occupational pension schemes from much of the private sector, and now it's coming on the public sector as well over recent years. Unionised workers are more likely to receive things like paid holidays and subsidised meals. So the range of rewards that's available in the unionised sector is really quite broad, particularly when we compare it with non-union workers. I think sometimes we like to fool ourselves that the entire economy is made up of knowledge workers who are working for Google and Apple and whoever, and in receipt of very extensive, very generous types of, and very imaginative types of rewards. For millions of employees, they're working in highly pressurised, competitive marketplaces where the levels of reward are really quite modest, and the range of rewards are really quite restricted, and access to things like sick pay and paid holidays, which are extremely important for employees, is really quite limited. So we need to acknowledge that the unionised sector and unions themselves have been very important in securing particularly things like deferred rewards, like pensions, which are extremely important rewards in terms of providing security to employees. We've also seen unions pursue this fairness, this moral agenda as well, which attempts to extend the range of rewards even further. So unions have been at the forefront, sometimes pursuing a litigation strategy to extend benefits for atypical workers. So extending employment rights for part-time workers was something that was pursued particularly by employees. The development of family-friendly working arrangements that came in with the Labour government in 1997 was a union-inspired agenda. The incorporation of training and development opportunities, which we might pose as being an important reward for employees in competitive labour markets, again, being an important part of the union agenda as well. So we need to recognise the unions actually have quite a broad and extensive range of objectives in terms of rewards. So we've had a look at a number of different aspects of where unions are attempting to get to in terms of the design of reward systems. Where are the likely disputes likely to occur? And there's some research that was undertaken by Matheson a few years ago, which looked at the kind of key causes of disputes over pay. Given the research that I presented earlier from Matheson about saying that the level of pay was and dissatisfaction of pay was a key cause of industrial disputes, then it's not much of a surprise that the actual terms of the wage effort bargain, pay level, in other words, was a key cause of disputes over pay in the employment relationship, disputes between employer and employee. In a related aspect of this as well, we can think about the inadequacy of pay in relation to rises in the cost of living. So that where the cost of living becomes more expensive and pay rises fail to keep pace with that, that this is a key cause of pay disputes. And this may be of particular relevance as in recent years we started to see inflation creep up to tend to be in a much higher level than pay settlements, and this is something that we see as being quite an important potential source of disputes between employer and employees in the coming years. Again, a similar kind of cause of pay dispute where pay doesn't provide for an adequate standard of living, where it doesn't meet the expectations of employees, or where pay doesn't reflect increases in efficiency and profitability. So where employees have been putting in more work, where work has been intensified, where performance has been increasing, where that's not reflected in levels of pay. That sense of fairness, that sense of quid pro quo, that sense of that comparison that we see employees make in between what they do and the contribution that they make and the rewards that they receive in return are not met, and where those basic feelings of unfairness become apparent. And another form of this, where people may see that the pay structure as a whole is unfair, that it's skewed between themselves and others, and that this might also be seen in a kind of collective way as well, that groups in the workforce are not getting a fair reward relative to others. Now this one is particularly important because when it comes to designing pay structures, it's very tempting for employers to attempt to load their resources that they have available in rewards onto the people that they think are most important in terms of generating competitive advantage. Employees may apply a very different measure, more of a kind of measure based upon what they think of as equity, contribution that's made to the organisation as a whole. Now that might not be about contribution to the bottom line, because people think about how hard they work, or about their level of skill, or whatever it might be, and it's really beyond their control as to whether or not their effort or their skill makes a contribution to profit, say. But they're still working hard and they're still exercising their skill, maybe to the best of their abilities. And so if employers are seeking to simply reward people on the basis of contribution and competitive advantage, and employees are seeking to gain reward from their contribution on different measures, then this may lead to a sense of unfairness and to conflict and to industrial disputes. The final point that Matheson makes is about disputes that may emerge over the particular method of payment. And this is something that I want to draw particular attention to, because this is particularly apparent in respect of certain practices that have become more prominent over the past 10 or 15 years, particularly payment schemes like performance-related pay or merit pay schemes that we've seen organisations adopting. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes looking at that in particular. Now, again, Adhiri's looked at the role of unions in respect of performance-related pay schemes, and notes that the reason why performance-related pay schemes have been a particular problem in terms of generating disputes, and certainly have been a particular problem in terms of generating the support from unions for this particular type of reward system, is because of its individualistic character. Now, we noted right from the start of this session that collectivising the employment relationship, of grouping the workforce together, is a key principle of unions' approach to employment relations. What performance-related pay schemes do, and merit pay schemes do, is to move in entirely the opposite direction. That this is about individual performance. It's about looking at what individual employees do, about what they are seen to contribute, about how they are seen to perform, and to reward them as individuals. It's just a complete challenge to unions' view of how rewards should operate. So the extent to which these schemes are developed in organisations represents something that unions are almost implicitly going to resist, because they run entirely counter to the traditional approaches that unions have tried to adopt. Particular reasons that Adhiri identifies for unions opposing these schemes can be set out fairly simply. They're seen as a threat to employees' security and stability of earnings. You know, there is a sense sometimes where employees feel there's a sense of natural justice in performance-related pay schemes. And there's empirical research, even amongst union members, who, when presented with the principles of a performance-related pay scheme, will feel attracted to it, largely because most people feel that if their performance is going to be measured and rewarded, that they'll do quite well. It'll be other people who'll be identified as poor performers. It'll be other people who will lose out, and so people tend to think that's fine. It's just a source of extra money. In practice, there are all kinds of difficulties with performance-related pay schemes, particularly in terms of the effective and secure measurement of employees' performance. There are all kinds of opportunities for performance to be measured wrongly, for people not to get the performance measurement that they deserve, and so therefore for their pay increases not to come as they might expect. So the extent to which managers are given discretion to make decisions over individuals' levels of pay based upon a subjective measure of performance is a fundamental threat to the security of employees across the board, security of rewards, and their stability of earnings. And because their pay represents their only effective source of income in most cases, then this has a real effect on the stability of their earnings, the overall level of well-being. Other reasons why unions might oppose PRP schemes is because of the well-known perverse effects of incentive pay schemes. These are widely known across the HRM literature, that as soon as you start measuring performance in a particular area, then that is where people's effort and attention goes, and that can undermine performance important levels of performance in other aspects of people's work. And so it can be a specific problem, but also that this might be a mechanism which frustrates effective labour management across the piece in a particular organisation because of the disruption, because of the demotivation, and because of the ill feeling that these kinds of schemes can generate. As I talked about earlier, the operation of individual schemes like this can tend to widen pay inequality, broaden the kind of hierarchy within pay structures, and as we've seen, it runs counter to unions' traditional concerns in relation to pay structures, and also these schemes can be seen as divisive. One of the key reasons, though, for opposition to these kinds of schemes is because of the way in which an individual type of payment system poses a fundamental threat to the union's role. You know, whether or not PRP is good or bad for employees, and you know there are all kinds of opinions on that. I tend to think that they're not generally good for employees as a whole. But you know, leaving that whole argument to the side, as far as the union's role in an employment relationship, the union's key role is as a collective representative, a bargaining agent for unions. Once you start to put in place an important part of a reward system which is based upon individuals and is based upon the assessment of individuals by a manager without discretion to any other kind of bargaining process, and you fundamentally threaten the role of the union as a collective representative. You fundamentally challenge the role of the union as a bargaining agent, and so they have tended, certainly in the first instance, to see performance-related pay schemes, merit pay schemes, as something to be resisted rather than something to embrace. Now, thinking about the role of the unions and the extent to which they may resist or embrace reward practices, what role can we see for unions in terms of engaging with the design of reward systems, with the adoption of new reward practices? If we're being progressive management, if we're wanting to incorporate new thinking, new approaches in the way that we run our reward systems, what support might we expect from unions, and why should we bother engaging with unions in this way? Why don't we just go ahead and do it and hang the consequences? So I just want to kind of finish off the session by thinking about these issues and think about what they can bring to the table and how we can engage with them in order to secure any potential benefits that might develop from that. Now, there is a number of pieces of research. Research in this area does point in a few different directions, but there is some important research from Eaton and Voos which talks about the potential positive impact that unions can have upon the adoption of workplace innovations, and those workplace innovations include reward innovations. The first thing that Eaton and Voos talk about is that where unions are involved and engage with the adoption of workplace innovations like this, that the effect of those innovations tends to be deeper, that these things tend to take effect, that they actually have an impact, that they do something. And there are all kinds of management innovations that come and go, and some of them just never stick. The effect of unions on workplace innovations tends to be that they do stick, that they do tend to have a deep effect, and that effect tends to be positive in terms of productivity and profitability. So if you can engage a union in this way, if you can get them on board, if you can involve them in the design, implementation and operation of workplace and reward innovations, then the impact is probably going to be quite good, probably better than you would get if you would go on it alone. We also tend to find that the involvement of unions in these kinds of innovations has a wider impact, that where unions are involved in innovation, that these innovations tend to integrate more widely with other people management practices, particularly things like communication, which has a very important multiplier effect in terms of productivity increases and so on. That these things spread better in unionised workplaces where unions are involved. The innovation and implementation of those innovations tends to work better and more smoothly and spreads more widely than it would where unions are not involved. From a union point of view, again, if we're thinking about an employment relationship, we need to think about things not just from the benefits to the employer, but why would a union engage with these things? Union engagement and innovation from a union point of view has some potential positive impact in terms of what's called their institutional centrality, the role that they have in the organisation. It embeds them in the organisation. And where unions are embedded in an organisation, they are able to operate more effectively as bargainers. Their position is secure. They are more likely to exercise more cooperative types of behaviours, and so there are all kinds of potential mutual gains outcomes from putting in place that degree of institutional centrality. So a number of different features. If there are benefits from unions being involved in the design, implementation, operation of reward practices, how do we achieve that degree of union acceptance? How do we get unions on board? We've seen that unions have got some particular kinds of objectives over pay level, which may run counter to the interests of employers. We've seen that unions may implicitly reject innovations like performance-related pay, merit pay schemes because it challenges their role as collective agent. Given that potential for disagreement, how can we get unions on board? Well, one of the key issues is about acknowledging the trade-offs that we talked about earlier on. Reward isn't a kind of a simple calculation. That there are those trade-offs, and unions will often engage in redesign of rewards, of accepting change, quite broad change in rewards as a quid pro quo for job security, particularly where extreme competitive threats are acknowledged. So if the organisation feels that it really has to change because of the competitive pressures that exist, and if they can convince the union that these pressures are real and not made up and not manufactured, that the organisation really does face real competitive pressure, and the chances are that unions are prepared to negotiate effectively and to look at a whole range of different approaches to reward that might, all other things being considered, go against their better instincts. The other aspect of winning union acceptance for changing rewards is about the acknowledgement of union concerns about management discretion. We've seen this issue about this issue of where the boundary of control lies has been a very important aspect of the way in which unions see the employment relationship. So where reward changes are seen to simply shift the boundary of control in management's favour, then unions are likely to resist. Where there are opportunities for those reward practices to be brought in under the joint regulation of unions and management, that is, that unions are given an explicit role in exercising some control over the way in which the reward practice functions, then that may limit some of their opposition. So we've seen performance-related pay schemes, for example, being accepted by unions on the condition that they have a role in the design of, say, performance measurement criteria, some oversight in terms of decisions that are made about performance levels, about the extent to which performance levels at different points trigger different kinds of performance payouts. That if unions have a role, an ongoing role in management and oversight, then they're not seen as such a threat to the role of unions and don't represent a simple shift in the balance of power towards management, and so therefore can be more widely accepted. Another criteria that unions might seek to balance against the adoption of reward systems are where the kind of riskier elements of new reward schemes are limited to some degree. So, for example, with the example I was talking about last time with the merit pay scheme, if a scheme was quite extreme, that is, that it loaded very high levels of performance rewards to the very top performing groups of employees and gave nothing at all to the lower levels of performing employees, unions would be likely to have a problem. Where a less extreme version of that was put in place. So the principle is still applied, that there is a difference being applied to higher performers and lower performers, but where that difference is not so extreme, then unions will feel that they've kind of limited the risk to their members sufficiently to support the scheme in various ways. We've also seen, I've seen in some of my own research, that for specific union bargainers, that the gap between managers and unions in terms of their particular preferences over reward elements is not as great as we might expect, and that there's often a lot of room for bargaining agreement over particular aspects of reward systems, to open up the opportunity for organisations to be quite imaginative and to find areas of potential agreement and compromise. Maybe not in every aspect of the reward system, but lots of opportunities for compromise because of the level of agreement that might exist between particular bargainers and particular managers that we might not expect if we simply say that all unions are the same and all unions have got the same kinds of objectives. Bargainers are individual and they take a subjective approach to their bargaining activity, and that with the right degree of information, there are opportunities for those negotiated outcomes to be achieved through compromise and through agreement.